Hey guys, what's up? Today I'm in the kitchen and we are going to be talking about sourdough. I started this sourdough starter a couple months ago. I think it was like the beginning of November when I started it, and it's the beginning of February now. I have been consistently making loaves with this for the past, I don't know, month or so, and have finally kind of figured out what works best for me in terms of making a weekly loaf or loaves of bread. So today is Friday. Yesterday, on Thursday, I got this boy out of the refrigerator. This is my sourdough starter. His name is Bradley Cooper. And fed him, put him in his home, which is in our laundry room because it is the warmest room in the house. He grew last night. As you can kind of see on the jar here, he went up to about here and now he's back down. So today is Friday morning. We're gonna feed him, put him back in the laundry room to eat, and then this evening we will be making dough. So I am going to show you the whole process of how I make my sourdough loaves. I don't do anything super fancy. I do an overnight bulk ferment, which I think makes a huge difference, especially without having to use any extra yeast. This is the only leavening agent I use in my sourdough loaves. So I'm going to feed him. I'm going to show you how I do that. I will also link below the YouTube video I watched about making a sourdough starter. I did not buy this starter, I actually made it myself. I tried 3 or 4 other different types or ways to do this before and they did not work, but this method did. So I will be sure to link that below. It was super easy. Okay, so this is what I use to feed him. I have a kitchen scale here that measures in grams. I have a cup of warm water. I don't need a whole cup, but I just heat up a cup. And then I have my flour. I actually use 2 different types of flour to feed him. And I'll talk about that in a second. So I'm gonna take off the lid and the paper towel. Oh, okay, this one is stuck. So we're gonna make a new paper towel lid today. I did not get the top cleaned off as well as I would have liked. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna discard. And normally, honestly, I just discard down the sink, but today I'll discard into this container so I can kind of show you how much I'm gonna discard. So this is a quart size mason jar. It's about half full or a little under half full. I'm not gonna discard a whole lot, to be honest, because I'm actually gonna make 2 loaves of bread this week. So I am gonna discard about a quarter of what was in here. And I'm gonna put it back on the scale. I'm gonna zero it out. And I'm going to add 100 grams of warm water. Now this is water that I put in the microwave, filtered water for about 25 seconds. That's just how my microwave works. You want it between like 90 and 100 degrees. So I'm gonna do 100 grams of water. It's a little over, but that's fine. And then I'm gonna use my little rubber spatula here. These are the best for mixing sourdough, in my opinion. And kind of scrape down the sides a little, and then I'm gonna go ahead and stir it up with the water so it can get incorporated. Okay, I'm gonna zero out my scale again. I'm gonna add my flour. Now, my sourdough starter actually uses 2 different types of flours. It uses 50 grams of whole wheat flour, and I just use a spoon and just kind of, I just weigh it out until I get to 50 or around 50. If it goes a couple grams over or a couple grams under, it's fine. So it's at 51, that'll work. Zero the scale out again, and then I do 50 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour. Make sure you're not using bleached flour because that's essentially killing the organisms living in the flour that we want. So we're at 50 for both. I'm gonna turn off my scale. I'm gonna stir this up. I'm gonna make sure I'm scraping down the sides as I do this. That way I know where to put my rubber band. Get it nice and stirred up. Plop my lid back on, which is just a paper towel and a jar ring. We're gonna adjust his rubber band. That way we know where he started. and he's gonna go in his warm place for about 8 hours before we make our dough. Okay, welcome back. It is the same evening. It is Friday evening. I have Bradley here. He is looking wonderful. He has grown and shrunk a little bit, but not much. He has been sitting in the laundry room for about 7 hours now and has been fed and is ready to make some bread. So I have everything I need here, and I'm gonna show you how I make my sourdough loaves. The recipe I'm using is from this book. It's called Artisan Sourdough Made Simple. I got this for Christmas, but it is on Amazon. I will put a link down below to it. It is a wonderful book. I love it. The recipe I'm using is the everyday sourdough, and I will type out this recipe down below. It's very easy and it's very hands-off, which I appreciate, and it makes wonderful loaves of bread. So this is everything you need. Essentially, these are the ingredients. We have salt. This is not kosher salt. This is just like free-flowing salt. Bread flour, your sourdough starter, and warm water. These are the tools I use: a little whisk, a little rubber spatula, and I just have a spoon just in case I need it. I have my bowl here, and I have my kitchen scale. This is just a Pyrex bowl. It's a medium size. I don't know. It doesn't say how big it is, but like here's my hand in it. So is that helpful? I don't know. You want to use a bowl that's not too small because you are going to do your bulk rice in this. So keep that in mind. Don't use something too small. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is turn on my scale. I have it set to grams. I have it zeroed out. And I am going to measure out 50 grams of starter. So I will just pour this into the bowl, and then I'll just use my little spatula to kind of stop it when it's done. And I got way too much. So this happens pretty much every time. I pretty much will just take my little spatula and pull out as much as I need to pull out to get it back down to that 50 gram mark. Okay, so this is the leftover starter. It's pretty much all of it. This recipe does really not take that much starter. So what I will do is I will actually pour this into an empty quart-sized mason jar. I change my jars on the days that I make dough, just to keep it in a clean jar. That's what I do. So then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add 350 grams of warm water. And then I'm just gonna whisk it together, whisking together the starter and the warm water. And then I'm gonna zero out my scale again, and I'm going to start adding my flour. So I use unbleached bread flour. This is the King Arthur brand. You don't have to use this brand, but this is just what I had available to me when I bought bread flour last time. So we're gonna measure out 500 grams of bread flour, but what I like to do is measure out about 150 grams. This doesn't have to be exact, but measure out about 150 grams, and then I like to whisk it into that water and sourdough starter. And this just helps avoid big clumps of flour when you are pulling the dough together later. It just kind of helps it incorporate a little bit better. Make sure you get your whisk nice and clean, and then continue to add the rest of your 500 grams of flour. Look at that, perfect. So now comes the fun part. I'm gonna take off my ring and I'm gonna take off my watch. I'm gonna roll up my sleeves because we are going to go in with our hands. So you want to create a shaggy dough, and I had no idea what that meant, but this book actually has a photo step-by-step guide and shows photos of every single step. That way you can kind of figure out like what it means to have a shaggy dough. Also, I forgot to add the salt. So we're gonna zero out the scale again, and we're gonna add 9 grams of salt. Okay. And I don't use fancy salt for this. You can. This book just suggests fine sea salt. You don't want to use like kosher salt because the grains are too big. But I just use the cheap salt from the grocery store. So I'm gonna mix this up. I'm gonna turn my scale off so it doesn't keep weighing. Pull it out. And then I'm just gonna keep mixing this until all the flour is incorporated. I'm gonna use my hand and it's gonna become a mess like this, but that's kind of what you want. You want it to be a sticky dough. You don't want it to be like a wet dough. This should not be wet. And I'm just taking my hand and kind of going around the side of the bowl like this and kind of flipping it just to get all of that flour incorporated. So now I have this messy hand. I'm gonna try to clean it off as much as I can. It's hard, but we're gonna try. Okay, so this is what your shaggy dough should look like. This is shaggy. It is not brought together super well. There's still some flour just kind of hanging out on the surface here. It is incorporated. All the ingredients are incorporated, but it's not like a nice smooth dough yet, and that's what you want. Okay, the next step is to cover your bowl with a wet towel and let it sit on the counter at room temperature for an hour. I just use like a flour sack towel. I get it wet. I use like warm water. I don't want to do cold water, but I also don't want to do hot water. So I just do warm water. I double up my towel and I put it on top of the bowl, leave it for an hour, and then come back, and that's when we get it ready for the overnight rise. So, see you in an hour. Okay, so it's been an hour. We're gonna uncover our dough. It's not gonna look much different at this point, but that's okay. So the next step is to stretch and fold. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take the edge of the dough, we're gonna pull it up, and we're gonna fold it back onto itself. Just go all the way around, pulling the dough back up, pulling it up, and then folding it back onto itself. Just like this. Just pull it up, fold it back into the middle. And you're gonna do this, just turn the bowl like a quarter turn every time you do it. Do this until you get all the way around. And you'll notice your dough is gonna be much smoother after you do this step. And that is going to make it look more like bread dough and less like a sticky mess like it did before. So you're just gonna keep doing this until you feel like you've done it enough. I usually do it, you know, 15 to 20 times. That's what it says in the book. So that's what I tried to do. Or just until I kind of feel like I have it where I want it. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put it in the middle of the bowl here like this. I'm gonna wash my hands. I'm gonna take my wet towel and I'm gonna cover it back up. This, I'm actually gonna get my towel a little more wet because it dried out a little bit. You want your towel wet but not dripping. You want it to be wet enough to provide moisture all night. Now, okay, because it is the winter time and because my house is cold, I have one of my seed heat mats. I have it plugged in. These are the ones I use to start my seeds in my house. These are waterproof. They stay between 75 and 80 degrees, which is perfect. So I'm gonna put my bowl on top of this mat, and I have this clear plastic tub that I'm gonna put on top. And this is how I'm gonna leave this for tonight, and in the morning we will finish it up and get it in the oven. So we will see you in the morning for the rest of the sourdough bread making experience. I know this takes a while, like hours wise, but it is not hard. This whole process of doing the stretch and fold took me like less than 3 minutes. So it's very easy. It's very hands off, but you do have to think ahead a little bit if you want to make a loaf of bread. So we will see you in the morning. Good morning. So it's the next day. It's been about 12 hours or so since we put the dough on the seed heat mat for the night to proof. So I'm gonna show you the next steps and then we're gonna bake it. So basically this tote that's on top of it is full of condensation, which is what we want. We want it to be nice and moist in there. So that's what we want. We want to keep it nice and warm and keep the dough from forming like a skin on the top. So I'm gonna uncover this and we'll move on to the next steps. Okay, so I'm gonna pull my tote off, and this is full of water. Move that out of the way, and I'm gonna uncover my dough. And it looks wonderful. It is sticking to the towel a little bit because it did proof up really nice, but I'm just kind of pulling it off. With my fingers. You definitely don't want to leave dough on your towel when you wash it. So there's a little bit left on here. I'll just scrape that off before I put that in the washer. So here's our dough that's been proving overnight. It looks wonderful. Our seed heat mat is here. I'm gonna unplug it and I'm gonna clean up underneath it. These heat mats are wonderful, but underneath them it will be wet. So I don't know if you can see how wet the bottom of this thing is. I'm just gonna wipe the counter down and then dry this thing off a little bit. We have our dough. We have our clean countertop. I'm gonna grab a bench scraper. This is a wonderful tool. If you don't have one, that's okay, but these are wonderful. And I'm gonna grab some flour. This is just my unbleached all-purpose flour. So the next step is to flour your work surface. I like to flour it pretty heavily. And then we're gonna pull our dough out. So this is just kind of how I do it. I just kind of grab it on the edges, pull it down, and let it release from the side of the bowl as it wants to. Gravity will help it come out, which is good. Get as much of that out of that bowl as you can. Okay. Get it onto your work surface. Let it sit for a minute. I'm gonna wash my hands. All right, so I'm gonna sprinkle the top of this with a little bit more flour. Okay, so I'm gonna take my bench scraper and I'm just gonna kind of move it where I wanna put it. Adding more flour as I need to. The dough is a little bit sticky, but that's okay, it'll still make bread. And I'm just gonna kind of push my bench scraper in, use my hand on the other side, and just kind of rotate it and turn it. And if there's any sticky parts, I am trying to kind of put some flour on those just to keep it from being sticky. Taking my bench scraper, scraping it, and turning it. And once I get it kind of in like a round shape, kind of like that, I'm gonna leave it. So this is gonna be the shape that I put in the oven. So what I'm gonna do now is wash our dough bowl really quick. Okay, so the next step, we're gonna get our bowl back. And honestly, normally I use another bowl,
but I only have one clear one this size, so we're just gonna use the same bowl. Take your bowl, take another towel. I like to use these flour sack towels. I feel like they work a little bit better. You're gonna take your flour sack towel and you're gonna put it in your bowl. Don't put it in the middle because you're gonna actually take this and cover it. Put your flour sack towel in the middle in your bowl, and you're gonna take some flour and you're gonna dust flour in on that towel. You don't need a ton, just enough to kind of dust it. So then what we're gonna do, okay, I think that'll work. I'm trying to find a good angle to show you this. We're gonna take our bench scraper, we're gonna take our dough, we're gonna pick the dough up, we're gonna turn the dough over, and we're gonna flop it into the bowl. Just like that. Okay, now we're gonna cover this up and we're gonna let it sit for anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour. My rule of thumb on this second rise is I preheat my oven to 425. It takes about 30 minutes or so. I'll also like make a cup of coffee. Once I make my cup of coffee and then I preheat the oven, it's usually been about half an hour or 45 minutes, and then I'll put it in the oven. If you need to leave it longer, like an hour, that's totally fine. You can do that. I've done that before. I've done it half an hour. I haven't really noticed a big difference. So we're gonna let this sit, and then we will bake it, and then we will finally have a loaf of sourdough bread. Okay, we are back. It's been about half an hour or so. I have my dough here. I'm gonna uncover it. Looks pretty good. I mean, it looks the same, to be honest. The next thing I'm gonna do is get it ready to go in the pan for the oven. So I have a piece of parchment paper here. I'm just gonna roll it over the top of the bowl, and then I'm gonna flip it to get it out. Just like that. It is a little precarious, I admit, but it works well, and then you don't have to try to get your dough out of the bowl. You can just flip it out. That went kind of on the side, but it's fine. So now what we're gonna do, so I don't have like a razor blade. I just use like a sharp knife, and I don't do anything fancy. I usually just go like down the middle, and then I go out to the sides a little. That's it, super easy. So then I'm gonna take my baking dish. This is a covered glass baking dish. You can use a Dutch oven, but my Dutch oven is huge and heavy, and this baking dish works just as well. So pick it up by the parchment and just shove it in the baker. Try to get mine to go back on the parchment a little. It looks kind of gross because I had to roll mine a little bit, but it's okay. Shove it in there, and then you're gonna put the lid on it. Okay, like this. This is how it goes in the oven. So I have my oven preheated to 450. I was wrong earlier, it's 450. And this is ready to go in. So this bakes for about 50 minutes, but it does not bake straight for 50 minutes. It bakes for 20 minutes with the lid on. Then you take the lid off, bake it for 30 minutes. Then you take it out of the oven, pull the parchment paper and the loaf out, just pull it out by the parchment paper, put it back on the oven rack for 10 minutes. That last 10 minutes is really important. It's gonna help build that crust, and it's gonna keep the bottom from being too soft. Now, I do have a tip for you. I have a smaller oven, and it has an element, a heating element in the bottom. It's an electric oven. I was having trouble getting the top of my loaves cooked and the inside cooked and the bottom not too dark. So what I did is I actually took a half sheet pan, put it on the bottom rack of my oven, and then put the top rack directly on top of it. That helps evenly disperse the heat. Using that sheet pan in the oven really makes a difference for me. If you have an oven that's a little bit bigger, I have a pretty small oven. You may not need that, but if you are noticing that your loaves are coming out and the bottom crust is a little too dark or thick try the sheet pan on the bottom rack, and it very well may help. If you have a top element in your oven, you might try putting that sheet pan on the top rack and then putting your bread underneath it. This is ready to go in. I'm gonna shove it in the oven for 20 minutes, take the lid off, 30 minutes, take it out, pull the parchment out and the loaf, put it back on the rack for 10 minutes. Okay, so here is the finished loaf. Looking beautiful. The bottom is nice and golden brown. It sounds hollow. So I'm gonna let it cool on this rack for a few hours. Just let it sit here on the counter, and then I will slice it. I'll slice it with a serrated knife. And once I slice it, I actually put the pieces in a freezer bag and freeze them, and then get them out as I need them and put them in the toaster. And they are delicious. So that is my sourdough method. It is not difficult. I do this pretty much every single week. Some weeks I'll make 2 loaves, some weeks I'll make 1. This book is awesome. I will put a link to this down below. I highly suggest checking this book out if you are looking to get into sourdough. This kind of explains the process. It has tons of recipes and I love it. So that is my method. If you have questions, let me know and I will try to help. I am by no means a sourdough expert, but I have gotten my weekly loaf kind of down to how I like to do it. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.